Right. So thank you again, everyone, for coming today. This is our kind of normal scheduled session, for the for everyone that works with StraightLine, and also for our friends at the MSU Retirees Association. I know Rick Vogt is on the call here. And Rick, thank you again for helping us publicize this. And I know you have to leave a little bit early today, so thank you for being here. So we have a number of things to talk about, as it comes to the market, just a few other things. But before we get into that, I wanted to just speak briefly about us at StraightLine. We've got a lot of fun things going on behind the scenes. Some of you have heard about this in detail. All of you will hear about this much more over the coming weeks and months. We have a number of announcements coming up, including one in the next couple of days, but I'm going to give you a bit of a preview of that one. And that is we've added some new partners and some new team members here at StraightLine, and both of them are on this call. So one of them is, at least for me, right over here, Rob Rickey, and the other one is over there on my screen, Kyle Zammit. Rob has come to us. We've known Rob for a very long time. Rob is spent 25 years. He's been in the industry for 30, but the last 25 of them have actually been at TIAA. And he was in charge of basically the team that worked with advisors like StraightLine. So when we first started our original contract with Michigan State back in 2008, that's when we actually first met Rob. And so his career evolved a bit, and he joined us after he left TIAA about a year or so ago. He joined us as a consultant, working really obviously behind the scenes with us for about 8 or 9 months, and things evolved to the point where he was able to join us full time, and we're thrilled to have him. So you'll hear Rob's name quite a bit in the near future here. Rob, I don't know, I'll put you right on the spot. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else.
No, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to be part of the StraightLine team and look forward to working with clients as well as helping StraightLine grow its business and better serve our clients. So it's an exciting time.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. And then Kyle Zammit has come to us and bringing some more new blood into StraightLine here. So Kyle is a graduate of Grand Valley State. He has passed his licensing exam, so he is fully up and running here with us, and will be that will continue to evolve over time. But you will hear his name also. He's going to be working with us. He's been working with us already, kind of on some of the research side and some of the operational side. He will be working in more and more on the advisory side as well. So we're thrilled to have him. So hello, Kyle. Good to see you. Okay. And there's a lot of other things. Another little bit of a preview. Some of you might have noticed this. We have relaunched our website. That's brand new. And we have a few new capabilities on that. We will be telling you more about those capabilities over the coming days and weeks. There are other evolutions at StraightLine that we're not going to get into today, but again, stay tuned, and we will cover those both individually and very likely in future sessions like this. So a lot of fun things happening. It's the result of a tremendous amount of time and work behind the scenes to update and to prep what we do and the services that we are able to offer to you for what we believe is necessary going forward. Okay. So we'll switch gears on that one, and we'll jump into a little bit more of a discussion about the markets. A lot of questions going on today. As always, the subjects change. but the concepts don't. There's always something new. There's always something fun going on. There's always something good going on. There are always some things that are bad going on. And of course, the things that are bad going on get a little bit more press. I promise I won't. Well, I guess I won't promise. I'll try not to do any of my normal rant on the on the media coverage of some of these things, but I can't promise that because I tend to slip into it every once in a while. So, but with that, I would want to talk about a couple of the bigger things right now, and obviously the thing that we've been hitting on these sessions every single time, and the big story now for the better part of a year and a half plus has been interest rates and movements and the Federal Reserve and their interpretation of what is going on and how they are basically how they have been working along with other forces in the economy to combat inflation, which has definitely slowed down by all practical measurements. And I'm going to turn it over to Andy to give some comments in a minute. But one more thing, remember, I think we've talked about this on these sessions before, but for those of you who haven't heard it, remember that inflation numbers coming down unfortunately doesn't always mean that prices have come down. That's not how those statistics work. The numbers that we hear, a year ago and 14, 15 months ago, we were hearing, 8.5% and 9.1% and all of these things, which just came out at, I believe, 3.7% on the most recent one. Remember that those numbers are being compared to the month from 1 year ago. All right. So yes, prices coming down definitely helps those things, and they have come down in some areas. But really, for those numbers to come down, it doesn't require prices to come down necessarily. It requires the speed at which they are increasing to slow down. Okay, that's how these measurements work. And all of a sudden, a year later, we're comparing them to higher times than existed, say, 2 years ago. And the statistics work in that way to show that things are calming down. So anyway, it doesn't mean that prices have necessarily dropped, but the speed at which they are increasing has slowed down. Okay, so for now, at least. So Andy, with that introduction, I'm going to send it over to you to talk maybe a little bit about what the Fed has been doing, perhaps the likelihood of and I see the question that's come in. That's a great question. I'll get to that in just a second. But perhaps the likelihood of another increase at the next meeting in November, and kind of what forces are kind of opposing each other in this discussion and decisions. So,
well, thank you for the easy question, Michael, and welcome to you all. And it's an interesting environment. I've been working on in the investment business for about 50 years, and every year is a challenge, and every year there's something new. And one of the great things about it is, unfortunately, you're learning all the time because things are different. And I think what's important right now is to say, how did we get here? And therefore, what's the likelihood of the Fed doing what it's going to do? And if you go back to, and I hate to think about it, go back to when the COVID came on board back in March, was it 2020? Seems like forever. What happened at that point is businesses in this country said, oh my God, and they cut ordering any products, and they reduced their inventory to the bare bones. And so there we are with businesses with inventory at the bare bones. Then the Fed comes in and pumps in money. But more importantly, Congress passed the CARES Act, 3 acts that sent checks to all of you consumers, and you had all this money. The problem is that the economy was basically closed down for a long period of time, so you couldn't go out and spend money at the movies, take a trip, go out and have some fun. The only thing you could do is buy things. And one thing Americans are good at is buying things. And boy, did we buy things. Furniture, and of course, working from home, people bought computers, etc. They improved their houses and so on and so forth. The result was orders for products were all of a sudden showed up at suppliers and retailers that had no inventory. So what did they do? Naturally, they started ordering and ordering. And guess what happened? As you know, the supply chains got backed up. And when the supply chains got backed up, suppliers and retailers said, maybe there's a different source. So they went to their secondary source, they went to their tertiary source and put in orders. And all of that clogged the supply lines, reduced the availability of products, and inflation went up. Supply and demand, supply was short, demand was high. And we went along like that. Then all of a sudden, the economy opened up. People could go traveling, they could go to the movies, they could go out and have fun, quote unquote fun. And so their need for goods substantially reduced. The demand for goods came down, or the rate of growth came down. And two, during this period of time, as a result, the supply chains began opening up. And then they opened up. And guess what happened to the suppliers and retailers? All the orders they put in to their current suppliers, to the secondary suppliers, and the tertiary suppliers, all of a sudden showed up. So it built up their inventories to a substantial level. And at the same time, consumers really shifted away from focus on goods to services and other means of enjoyment. As a result, the retailers wound up with excess inventories. How do you get rid of the excess inventories? They started cutting prices, one, or two, they sold their inventory in bulk to the off-price retailers. The bottom line was goods inflation started coming down. And that's what we've been seeing over the last year, goods inflation coming down. So we're seeing the rate of inflation coming down. And that's what when you look back on this inflation, there's no question it was more supply, it was supply driven more than any other factor. The Fed can affect demand, but it really cannot easily affect supply. And so the result was the inflation from the supply shortage, and then all of a sudden a flood of inventory came into the suppliers and retailers, and they had to get rid of it. Prices came down, and that's what we're seeing, inflation coming down. At the same time, the Fed raised rates at record rates. It went up over 5% in about 12 months. And yet, what's interesting about all this, the economy has shown no real reaction to it. The economy continues to grow. Unemployment levels remain at historic low levels, and puts the Fed in an interesting position to make a decision, the next decision. Inflation's coming down with goods. Services, the inflation is coming down, but not as rapidly. And that's very difficult to bring inflation down in services rapidly. So here's where you're sitting on the Board of Governors. You're sitting there. And what are you thinking? You got two thoughts. One, I raised interest rates a heck of a lot. And Milton Friedman has said that there's a lag, a variable lag between when you raise interest rates and when the impact on the economy hits. And so far, we haven't seen it. So you're sitting there saying, I raised the interest rates a lot, but I haven't seen the impact on the economy. Do I really want to raise interest rates anymore until I see the impact on the economy? That's your first thought. Your second thought is, boy, the economy is growing pretty well. The forecast for this quarter, the third quarter that ends in 2 weeks, is anywhere from about 2.5% to almost 5% GDP growth, which is not bad considering people were forecasting a recession for the last 12 months and we haven't seen it. So I'm sitting there at the Fed and I'm saying, okay, I really don't want to raise interest rates anymore because I haven't really seen, until I see the impact of higher interest rates on the economy. On the other hand, I don't want to reduce interest rates because I'm concerned about inflation still lagging around, particularly with the economy growing as much as it's growing. And two, and this is something that's been in the back of the mind of the of the Fed since inflation has gone up. They looked at the 1970s and the mistakes that the Fed made back then. And what I mean by that is we had a record level of inflation in the 1970s. And I don't know the age of individuals I'm talking to, but I was alive, well, and kicking in the 1970s. I started working on Wall Street January 2nd, 1970. So I've seen it. And the Fed thought it had won the battle against inflation, reduced the Fed rates, and all of a sudden the economy improved and the inflation went up even higher. And that was a series of that until Paul Volcker came in and ultimately collapsed the economy to bring inflation down for an extended period of time. And I remember long rates, I think it was in 81 or 82 when I was putting money away from my daughter for school, for college in 17 years. I was getting like 13% interest rates on my government treasuries for 17 or 20 years, whatever it was, on a strict treasury. So those were the interest rates then. Those are the mistakes the Fed made. So I'm sitting on the board. I'm seeing the strength of the economy. I look at the 1970s, and I come to the conclusion, one, I'm not sure I should raise rates because I don't know what's going on with the economy relative to the rates we raised. And two, I'm not sure whether inflation is going to settle down or not. Look what happened in the 1970s. So maybe I should keep interest rates up. So in my view, it's probably at best 50-50 that the Fed raises rates. They're not going to raise in September, raises in November, but it really doesn't matter. We're within 2 months of November. If they raise rates, it's probably the last rate increase they're going to hit. But more importantly, because of their experiences in the 1970s, I think they will keep that rate for some period of time before they consider reducing it. Now, one of the other influences on their decision-making next year is something called a presidential election, which I think you're all aware of for next year. And so there's political impact on what the Fed's going to do. So on that basis, I doubt they're going to raise it again. And two, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of drive from Washington to reduce the rate. So next year, we're likely to see a rate cut later in the year, probably, if I'm guessing, before the election. I'm thinking politically now. But that's where we're at. The economy has been surprisingly well. We've had the fastest increase in interest rates by the Fed since 1987, going back to 1987. At the same time, unemployment has remained historically low. So this has been a unique increase so far, a unique cycle in the Fed. Unemployment remaining historically low, the economy doing okay, and inflation coming down faster than it has in the past Fed cycles. And that's where we're at. But I will say, when you read the various economists, there's no certainty in the outlook. And therefore, and what StraightLine does in its investing is to create a diversified portfolio, which is very important in a world of uncertainty, dealing with uncertainty. So I think that is the best recommendation one can give in this environment, is making sure that you have a diversified portfolio of investments. And that's something that StraightLine definitely specializes in. And I'll turn it back to you, Michael.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's and I think when you talk about, we've said this all many times before, there's always uncertainty. Okay, the only time, it's easy to look backwards and say, oh well, we could have done this, we could have done that, and oh well, it was calm before. We now know that it was calm before. Well, you don't know that something was calm until something starts to really break out and kind of go wild on you, right? So you can only see these things when you're looking backwards. So again, as Andy said, it's where that diversification comes from. There is always uncertainty. There will always be uncertainty, but there are certainly times when there are higher and lower amounts of it. There are a couple other things we want to talk about specifically in the market, but before we do that, that are basically the highlight reel of of uncertainty at this moment. Um, Everybody on here that works with StraightLine directly, whether we're working with your accounts inside of a retirement plan, Michigan State or GM or wherever it might be, or whether you are working with us on assets that are outside of that, IRAs or anything else, everybody should have seen some changes to their accounts in the recent past. Some of them earlier this week, and some of them just a little bit before then. A lot of those changes were tied more than anything to some of the interest rate things that Andy just mentioned. So what I'd like to do now is invite Sunny Mehra, who, for those of you who don't know, Sunny is our director of research internally here at StraightLine, and he works most closely with Andy and Steve Turry, who is also on the call here, who are our research partners again at Skyview, not directly part of StraightLine, but very much a part of our research process. But Sunny internally is our research director. And Sunny's going to speak for a minute about the changes, just in general terms, that have happened on both sides as it relates to this. And Sunny, I might put you on the spot here. During your answer, a question came in a minute ago, and I think it's a very good one, and it's been part of the decisions that we've made. But the question was, why are bond mutual fund yields so low while bond yields have risen? And I certainly have some thoughts about that too. But I might ask you to maybe address that, at least in part, while you're talking about some of the changes that we've made, because it's very much a part of it.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So we've made a series of changes really over the last month or so. It started with the Schwab accounts late August. We decided to sell the existing treasury positions that we had and move to new positions at higher yields. So we were able to sell the treasury bonds and buy a 6-month treasury and a 3-year mortgage-backed agency bond. And the yields on those were kind of in the 5.5% to 6% range. And then on the plan side, we kind of reviewed the fixed income holdings. A lot of plans have stable value funds. Those are paying anywhere from 2 to 3%. And that was great when rates were at 0. But now as short-term rates have risen to about 5 to 6%, doesn't look quite as attractive. So we've increased the allocation to bond funds or money markets, depending on what's available in the plan. And regarding the question, bond funds, the yields have risen, but maybe not kept up with short-term rates because bond funds have lower yielding bonds on the books, so they can't just sell them all and take big losses, so they have to hold on to them. So if they were holding bonds that they bought in, prior to 2022, they're still holding on to those and either selling them off in pieces or just waiting for them to mature, depending on kind of what the situation is. So those yields will continue to rise, but they maybe haven't kept pace with what the Fed has done.
Yep. Thanks, Sonny. Yeah, and that's the one thing that I was going to add is it depends on the type of bond fund. Obviously, there are some funds that focus only on short-term rates, and those are obviously able to adjust much faster as rates change, better or worse, for better or worse, as they go up or down, they change. Most bond funds, particularly the bond funds that tend to appear in retirement plans like 401ks and 403bs, they tend to be maybe not long-term bond funds, but at least perhaps intermediate term bond funds, which means that there is going to be a lag as those rates, as those rates move. There is a delay between when you see those things. Now, there may be some ways to take advantage of it in different ways. That's some of the things that we have done in our changes recently is to kind of counteract some of that and to move away as best we can from some of those things. Like even as Sonny was mentioning, the stable value funds, which were the best game in town. We're maybe the only game in town for years, for better part of 15 years. And they have gone from the best game in town to looking comparatively terrible overnight through no fault of their own, but just because the rates have moved so quickly. Okay, so there, depending on the plan, depending on the type of assets, there are different things that we can do. Obviously, in a more restricted environment like a 403b, your options are going to be a little bit different than something like an IRA. But if you have further questions about that, that's something that we'd love to speak with you about individually. Okay, so a couple of other things. I purposely wanted Sonny to talk about the changes we've made before bringing up these points, because I didn't want these to seem like they were gigantic drivers of the changes that we made, because they're not. They're significant and they could become extremely significant. But the other two big things that are going on right now, especially for those of us, and most everybody on this group is in or around Southeast Michigan, right? So our friends in the auto industry have been making some headlines lately. I'm sure you have seen this. And, you know, there's questions. Actually, it is Tuesday, September 14th at 2:36 p.m. Eastern time right now, which means that we are less than 10 hours away.
Thursday, Mike.
Did I say Wednesday?
You said Tuesday.
Tuesday. You know, they all bleed together after a while. Let me try that again.
Well, it begins with a day.
Thursday, September 14th. Thank you for correcting me. It is still correct that we are within 10 hours of the UAW contract ending with all of the big three auto manufacturers. So, and this cycle of auto of negotiations has been a little different than ones over the past few years and recent decades, in that it has been very public and very loud. And the new president of the UAW campaigned very much on and won a very narrow victory, less than 500 votes. But he campaigned on the idea of being very, very tough against the manufacturers, and he has stuck to his guns. They have stuck to their guns, led by him. So the chances of a strike happening, and part of this is the negotiating tactics that they have chosen to use, but the chances of a strike happening have increased significantly. Now, obviously, here we are, and it's the last day. So, but what has happened? So there's been questions that we've heard coming in is, you know, is this going to tank things? Is this going to mess up the economy? Is this going to have wider reaching impact? This is one, and I want to be very careful how I say this, because I know for a fact that some of the people on this call are affected directly by this, and their own companies are right in the crosshairs of this thing. And so I would never want to minimize the impact of this for anyone, okay? But that said, we have to look at this, if we're talking about the market implications, we have to look at this as a percentage, if you will, or in terms of the likelihood of the overall impact to the economy. And right now, and again, we reserve right to put an asterisk. I'm putting a big asterisk next to this because this could change, and it could change fast. But the way that the union is talking about the strike happening, assuming that it does, is a bit more strategic than the kind of blanket, we're going to walk out on GM or Ford or Stellantis, you know, formerly Chrysler, and just shut down the whole place. What they're talking about, at least as of now, is targeted strikes, shutting down certain plants for certain periods of time, and making it obviously impactful, but a little bit more limited in a strategic way, based perhaps on how conversations are going and negotiations are going with different companies at different times. So, time will tell, and who knows, by tomorrow afternoon, this whole thing may be a moot point. But they have made some very significant demands well beyond what has existed in recent rounds of negotiation going back over the last 5 or 10 years. And whether, in this case, whether those demands are good or bad is really, I think, beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. And it's really not for us to decide. What is for us to decide and perhaps react to is the potential fallout from this. Obviously, any prolonged and widespread work stoppage in the auto industry is going to have ripple effects that go a long way. It appears as of this moment that is not the most likely outcome right away. And even if there is a strike, that it's going to be perhaps a little bit more targeted and therefore not as impactful in the broad scheme of the economy. But time will tell. There are interconnected factors here. The Teamsters have now come out and said they're not going to deliver new vehicles for any for anyone that is, or any of the companies that are striking. We honestly just have to wait and see. But at this point, it is not something that we feel has risen to the level where we need to make a specific change because of it. Okay. The other thing that is, I think, similar in terms of impact is our old favorite words, government shutdown. Everybody's heard about this one lately too, I'm sure. Now, one thing you might be saying is, didn't you guys just talk about this? Didn't you just talk about the debt ceiling and the potential shutdown related to that? And the answer is yes. And then the next question is, well, didn't they fix that? Fix is a relative term, but the answer is yes, they did. So why are we talking about government shutdowns again? Well, we're talking about this now in the context of the federal budget that has to get passed, or perhaps the federal budgets, plural, that have to get passed before the end of this month. And believe it or not, I know everybody appears to be sitting down that I can see, so it's good, so you won't fall over from shock. But our politicians on both sides are not getting along on this subject. So we don't quite know exactly how these things are going to play out. There's a lot of posturing. There's a lot of brinksmanship, just like there always is. We do expect, yes, maybe it will shut down. We do expect that there's going to be some type of a resolution to this, whether it is before the end of this month or shortly after. Time will tell. Again, same answer, like I said a minute ago with the UAW situation. We do not believe, as of this point, that it has risen to the level where we need to make a significant change. So we will continue to monitor these things as always. We will wait and see how the fallout is likely to impact the larger economy and whether it does rise to the level of a significant problem. But one thing that I think it's important to keep in mind, yes, the market has pulled back a little bit. It pulled back in the month of August. But the market, I would say, has not really reacted too much to these things yet. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. It did the same thing even during the last round of government issues around the debt ceiling negotiations, which were a much bigger story than this one has been, at least so far. But the market didn't really react that much. Why? Because despite all the noise, despite all the breathless reporting, despite all of the screaming talking heads on both sides, the expectation was that they were going to come to some type of a resolution, and they did. That was our expectation along the way as well. So right now, this is really, in theory, not quite as big of a barrier as that last one was. So the expectation is still, I think, that the resolution is going to happen in some way on or about the end of this month. So stay tuned. We will be watching, and we will be making adjustments if we feel it is necessary. But right now, I think one of the overarching stories that's important to remember here is that, again, there's a lot of, we are hearing a lot of questions about things, and of course we always hear more questions about the negative things, China and their activities, or the speed of their economy. Is that slowing? Is that going to hurt, is that going to hurt us, or is it going to hurt the world? We've heard things lately about, all kinds of crazy theories about about money itself and the money supply and how those things might be impacted. Things are rarely as drastic as some of these louder voices tend to make it seem. And while I don't think there's anybody, certainly not on our team or on our partners team, Skyview, or any of the other voices that we are using, I don't think there's anyone that is just sitting there saying, oh, the coast is totally clear, everything is great, markets just should have, no barriers and just nice, gently rising. No one's really saying that, but at the same time, I think there's definitely enough positive out there. We think there's enough positive out there to, if nothing else, to provide a significant argument against the questions of, some imminent blow up in the market or in the economy. Okay. Or in the real estate market even. We've had that question a lot too, and I know we've talked about it on these sessions in the recent past. So, some people kind of look at these things as inevitable. Well, it's been going up and it has to come down. Well, yeah, okay, eventually, yeah, maybe, but does it have to be drastic? Does it have to be immediate? And our answer is no. There needs to be a force that is driving those things. And right now, we think the forces are, if not all wonderful, are not all negative. Okay, so as Andy Melnick number of months ago coined the immortal phrase, the most forecasted recession in history that still hasn't happened, and we continue to watch for it, right? And that's another question we've had. Well, is there going to be a recession? Well, the answer is, well, eventually, yeah. Okay, but that, I mean, is it because of these factors? Is it because of this cycle? Is it going to be a couple of years from now? No one can say that with any degree of certainty. And the market and the economy has been, for all the reasons Andy said, has been tremendously resilient during this. Spending has been tremendously resilient. Whether that's good or bad, again, is another question. But it is a fact. And people may not be spending money in a happy way, and they might not be spending money in exactly the way they would prefer, but economic activity is still happening and corporate earnings are still happening. So we look at these things as factors that solidify our opinion. But to tie it all back to that same magic word, it is why taking big bets in certain areas and trying to time these things never works over the long term, and why the importance of diversification. Again, it's a good old boring word that's not entirely fun, but it's why it works over time. Okay. So
Mike, can I make one quick comment on the closing?
Yeah.
The important thing for a lot of us is this affects discretionary budget spending, not mandatory. And what that means is, even if the government closes for a year, which is not going to happen, mandatory spending, which means Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, will continue. So this is really just discretionary spending budget issues.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. Andy always leads our meetings with a comment about Social Security. Don't you, Andy? Yeah.
Well, I try and encourage all the youngies to continue paying their FICA so that I can enjoy my good life. And those of you who are getting Social Security, always encourage the young people to continue spending and paying their FICA taxes so we can live the good life. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So with that, we are we're about 40 minutes in. I told you that I didn't promise about the media comment, and I did work a little tiny one in. Not a bad one. It wasn't a full soapbox event. But I did promise that we would have plenty of time left over for questions. And we do. This was pretty much the end of kind of the prepared, if you will, part of this. So with that, does anybody have any questions? Again, feel free to type them in, or if you'd like to unmute yourself and just ask away, please feel free.
Yep. They're known as the silent generation. I'm part of that.
No problem. Okay. Well,
I have a question.
go ahead, Bruce.
We don't see many new cars on dealers' lots. It seems like they should be catching up now. Do you have any comment on that? Are they holding them off in inventory someplace so it gives the illusion that they don't have them, or what's going on? Do you have any?
It's a good question. I don't have the statistics on that, because all the manufacturers will actually quote that in terms of number of days of inventory. I don't have those statistics right in front of me. I don't know if Andy or Steve or Sonny. I don't know if
I would say the inventories have been improving relative to what we saw a year ago, and you're seeing that in deals that the dealers are offering, certainly in our area, where they didn't in the year ago. And you can see it also in the fact that the used car prices have been coming down. So there must be a greater supply of used cars, which means they're selling cars, I suppose. But I think the pressures to some degree is off because the delivery of chips and other requirements for making the car are now pretty normal. The issue from the auto strike, if there is an auto strike, will be just your question whether there'll be a shortage of cars and therefore have an inflationary impact.
good question.
I guess, when do you see it normalizing? Well, you see it normalizing?
What normalizing?
Well, where it was before COVID.
I don't think my point on post-COVID is we're in a different world. So I don't think it's normalizing in the sense that we're going to see interest rates as low as the last decade or inflation as low as the last decade. Remember, in the last decade, the Fed spent all its time trying to get inflation up, and now it's spending its time getting inflation down. And the reason I say there's a change and we're not in the same normal period, that COVID changed globalization. The relationship with China's changed. We've got a war in the Ukraine. The Europeans are getting gas from a different source than they had in the past. And you're seeing that U.S. industry is talking about relocating where it's assembling products, et cetera, either to other parts of Asia or back here in North America. I'm a big believer that the next decade is going to be the North American decade because we're going to see more assembly back in the United States, and it'll require more automation because our workforce is not growing that rapidly. And two, because of our agreements, we'll probably see more work that was done in China coming back to on a labor tense areas, actually to Mexico. And then we have the investments that have come about to build more semiconductor plants in the United States. And then the misnomered Inflation Reduction Act to spend a lot, make a greater investment in green energy, and I'm not sure whether I should mention the word electric vehicles. All of that is a part of the change that you're going to see over this decade. So whether you when you say normal, I don't think it's going to be like the last decade. But on the other hand, I think it's going to be a very exciting decade for growth and for our economy and North America. And I think it'll be the benefit to all of us as a result. And I'm very optimistic as we come out of this period. Naturally, like in all things, you're going to have to moderate your optimism over time. But I am quite positive on what I see. You have to recognize that China is going through a great deal of change. The demographics are incredible when you think about it. Their population was over 1 billion, and in the next 20 to 30 years, it'll probably come down to about 500 million. So they'll no longer be the manufacturing source of cheap products for the rest of the world. When China joined the World Trade Organization, it was able to export low-cost labor to this country, and they grew a lot, and our industrial suffered a lot. So we talk about China growing a lot, but we don't mention the suffering, particularly in the Midwest, as a result of that. And I think that is changing, and that's another reason why I think we're going to see a much better position for North America and our country. And I take great pride in our country doing better. And so I'm optimistic, but it isn't going to be like the last decade.
My normalized, I think, is very, very interesting, your commentary, but as far as the supply chains getting where we're not having shortages or that kind of is, I think, more specifically in normalizing in that regard.
Yeah, I think the supply chains will normalize, but the supply chains will be different. And one of the issues will be in the use of critical minerals. When you think about a gasoline car, the U.S. has really balanced its ability to provide gasoline through drilling in the United States. When you start talking about electric vehicles, China controls the processing of some of the key materials that you need for an electric car in a battery, in the processing of lithium, cobalt, etc. And so relative to your question, it's going to be very important that we develop independent sources of processing and critical raw materials to be able to manufacture electric vehicles in the volume you want to do and at prices that people can afford. I happen to have an electric vehicle, and I can tell you the positives and the negatives. And most of the people that write a lot about the positives, I don't believe they own an electric vehicle. So I can talk to it because I actually own one. The first thing I found out was you can't get AM radio in an electric vehicle. So how am I supposed to get my favorite radio stations when I can't get so on and so forth? First thing. The second thing is, unless you own a Tesla, and Tesla's done a tremendous job of providing recharging facilities all over the United States, but particularly in California, and reliably. There's been a reliability test. Tesla's recharging facilities don't work maybe 4% of the time. Everybody else's doesn't work 20% of the time at least. And so if you don't, my point of view is if you need more than one car and you need a home where you have a garage where you can have a charge. And then if you're an adventurer, you go on a long distance ride if you're not a Tesla owner. So we've got a long way to go to make the EV similar to the gas car. But let us remember that when the gas car came in, those people who were riding horses laughed at you because they had oats available all over the place. And the way you refueled your car originally was to go to a hardware store and get a can of kerosene and then so on and so forth. So the world will change over the next decade in this regard. But I don't think it's as easy as some people seem to make it out to be. And by the way, relative to parts, My first maintenance, required maintenance, is 2 years after I got the car. No maintenance for 2 years. It shows you the difference.
Well, and one other thing, Andy, this is one of the things that the UAW is fighting, to tie it back to
Oh,
that.
absolutely.
It doesn't take as many people to make an electric car. Not to mention the fact that some of the biggest leaders in the electric car are not unionized.
Yep.
So
Yep.
this
Such
is
as Tesla.
yeah, the Tesla, the main one. So this is all part of those negotiations and part of the reasons that they're fighting so hard, because the government is pushing this. And not to get, again, not to get political, but it's also the UAW, which is typically, very vocal about their support for different politicians, particularly on the Democratic side, have withheld that because Democrats are pushing, and again, not right or wrong, just the Democrats are largely pushing the green agenda and the electric cars, which is actually a problem for the UAW. Right? So you can't pull one lever in economics without affecting a whole bunch of other ones. And this is a really good example of it. So, we're going to, how this all plays out is going to be really kind of fascinating.
Yeah, what Mike is talking about, it reminds me of, again, when the U.S. said to China, you can join the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And the politicians, I don't criticize them because all parties said, well, we'll bring China in. If they become part of world trade, it'll liberalize China and they'll become more democratic. And we certainly haven't seen either of that. And the EV is sort of the same situation where one economist expects that 40% of the employment in auto manufacturing will be eliminated by the EV. And so when you look at the development of populism in this country, it is really a reaction against decisions being made that affect personal lives very substantially. And I don't want to get into too much, but clearly what happened with the WTO and what's happening here is sort of the same situation where very smart people think this is a very smart idea, but don't think about the human impact of that smart idea. And that is, to me, very critical.
Yep. So a couple of other questions have come in. We're going to keep going. Obviously, if anybody needs
By the way, the one thing I find interesting about Zoom calls, I was coughing and I'm looking at my computer and I still covered my mouth. I guess I'm protecting my computer. I don't know what it is. Anyway, let's move on.
That's good. Now, so a couple of other questions have come in. Again, if anyone has to drop off, obviously we certainly understand, but we're going to keep going and answering these questions. One of them is about RMDs, required minimum distributions. I'm going to get to that one in just a second. There was a comment about plug-in hybrids. I don't disagree. Unfortunately, technology didn't. Right now is just not in favor, and it's just the way that the manufacturers have worked and how the government has forced them to move. So
I agree with the plug-in hybrid. Go ahead.
Yeah. So one question is, and this is a timely one also with some of the things restarting. The RMDs I'm going to get to after. So whoever asked that question, don't go anywhere. But the one question was, what is the cause of high student loan interest rates? Is it risk related? And that's a fantastic question. And one where we could one where we could spend entire sessions on this. There's, like everything, there's never going to be one answer for these things, but student loans in general have definitely been a big question lately because despite other court battles, and again, we're not going to talk about right or wrong. We can't, because everybody's interpretation of these things is going to be different. But there were questions, we have loan payments restarting, and then there's comments being made now about people who are going to have to prioritize other spending or stop other spending to cover these things because people's budgets have evolved. People who owe these things especially have evolved with the expectation that they weren't paying them. okay, in some ways. Not all, but those things have happened. The rates, I still think that a lot of, I think that in the face of the losses that the administration has faced in court over its ability to just flat out cancel some of these things or modify these things in certain ways, I still think that there will be other types. You're seeing little bits of it where they're canceling little tranches of these things for different reasons. It would not surprise me at all if the next things that they tried to do were to modify them or to reduce their rates, because most of these loans are now government owned. So I think that there was a question of risk related. I'm not certain of the context of that second question, but I think it might mean, is there a wider risk with the beginning of these payments? Is there and obviously the redirected spending that's going to require, is there a larger risk to the economy in general? And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, given the other two things that we've talked about, at this point I don't think that that's enough of an economic impact to completely change our outlook on things. It's a very good question, and how it actually comes back up, I think we have to kind of see how these things will fully play out. So I hope that answers that question, at least to some degree. I don't know if anybody else has any comments about that, but I definitely want to get to the other question here about
Mike, it's Rob. I would just add that,
Please.
student loans are unsecure. And that's an important factor in terms of obviously determining the risk level associated with them. So I think that's an important point, especially in a rising interest rate environment. Your unsecured debt, those rates are going to be higher. So I think that's an important point.
Yep. Thank you. So I'm gonna move to the next question here. And as of now, this is the last one that's on here. Again, feel free to keep going. But the question is, what is the purpose of required minimum distributions? And will there ever be a time we can opt out of receiving them? A fantastic question. So I'm going to handle this one. So first off, what is a required minimum distribution? A required minimum distribution is, and there are several different forms of them, but it's basically forced distributions from retirement plans. And the plans, and it's based on age. Okay. Now these rules apply to 401ks, pre-tax 401ks, traditional 403bs, traditional IRAs. All of these accounts for RMD purposes are exactly the same. And it is essentially is the government saying, okay, we don't, it says, you've waited long enough. And remember, the distributions from these accounts are taxable. So it's the government saying, you've waited long enough. We don't particularly care if you need it. We don't particularly care what you do with it. But you have to start withdrawing a percentage of them from your retirement accounts so that it counts as income and we get our tax revenue. That's it. That's the only purpose of a required minimum distribution. That's also why required minimum distributions only apply to pre-tax retirement accounts. Roth IRAs, regular taxable accounts, there is no income associated with any distributions from those contracts. Again, provided you're past 59.5 in the case of a Roth IRA, there is no tax on it. Therefore, you're not required to take it out during your lifetime in those accounts. But for pre-tax accounts, and the vast majority of everyone on here has at least the bulk of their assets, if not all of their assets, in pre-tax retirement accounts, you are forced to start taking it out. Now, the time frame has changed. For years, the point at which you had to start those distributions was age 70.5. At the end of 2019, a rule was passed. It kind of got almost, no one almost really noticed it because of all the COVID stuff that happened. But at the end of 2019, the age went to 72. Okay. And at the end of last year, it went to 73 and became effective immediately. So the beginning age is 73 for this starting in 2023. The other thing that happened with the rule that was passed at the end of last year, it immediately moved the age to 73. It also put in a time frame where the age is going to move, the beginning age is going to move to 75. And that time frame is year 2033. Okay. So, yes. So, unless the rule is changed again, the answer is it begins at age 73, and that will be the answer for the next 10 years. Okay. Now, will there ever be a time we can opt out of receiving them? It's a fantastic question. But without some significant changes in the rules and in the philosophy behind the rules, unfortunately, the answer is likely to be no. Now, I will say this. The same basic group of lawmakers were behind the bills that moved it originally in the 2019 from 70 and a half to 72, and the same group pushed it to 73/75. That group has been very public about their goal is to eliminate the RMD entirely. Now, will that ever happen? It's hard to say yes to that one because it's just too big of a source of revenue to the government, which is always desperate to find them. So that is it. Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about RMDs. A lot of people think that they are designed to drain the accounts out over a relatively short period of time. They are not. They are designed to force you to take money out over your lifetime. And while you are living, and you are talking about your own account, your age, and there's actuarial factors that work into this. But the amount of money that people have to take out as a percentage of the account is often a lot less than people assume. Okay. So we can at 73, there's a calculation that goes into this, but the result is a little less than 4% of the account will have to come out, and it goes up steadily under the current table until the age of 120. At 120, it levels off. We haven't had to calculate one yet for anyone at 120. I'm sure the day is coming. Mike Rice says he's going to be him. I believe that. So but the amount that you have to take out as a percentage of the account steadily increases over those times. But it doesn't even get into the upper single digit in terms of percentage until you're actually well into your 80s. Okay. So that's it. That's the way that this stuff works. Now, I won't go into all the details of this, but if you inherit an account, your options are a little bit different, particularly if you are inheriting an account from someone besides a spouse. Okay, so if a parent passes away, the rules about inherited IRAs and required minimum distributions have changed pretty significantly over the last few years. I won't get into the details of that. We can certainly do that with you individually, but I don't want to muddy the waters any more than I already have. But that is what an RMD does. That is its purpose. That is how it is slated to change. And unless there is a big push and a big replacement of revenue from another source, I think the RMD is going to be with us for, let's say, the foreseeable future.
Mike, if I could add one thing.
Yes.
If you can, if you're in a position to afford it, but you have the RMD, you can use the RMD as a contribution to charity.
Yes.
And there, in that case, you're not taxed, but it is not a tax deduction from your income tax as well. So you can use it as a charitable contribution. It's not taxed, but it's not a tax deductible item either.
Correct. Yes. Thank you. That does avoid the tax impact for you in the current years. So there are plenty of options with them, and certainly things that we can help you with and help you strategize. But I believe that they are going to be with us for a while, if not forever.
Unless we can elect a Congress that's all 85 years old or more, and then we'll definitely eliminate the RMD.
It would increase the odds. So, all right. So with that, those are all the questions that have come in on the chat. Does anybody else have anything that they'd like to ask? Okay. Thank you again.
Well, there's one more thing about the RMDs, I think. Can you give them to your children tax-free? No, somebody's going to pay the tax. Either you're going to pay it and give it to your children tax-free, or your children are going to inherit it and they're going to pay the tax.
Thank you. Thanks for catching that that question as it before we ended. If you
Mike, I'm sorry. Can we make it's a great point, and I would just add to that in the planning process, not to talk about the year of death, but I think it's a great topic with RMDs. Is one of the things to think about is, to Beth's point, if IRAs are passed to a child or to a beneficiary and they have to take the required minimum distribution, right? They always have to take the distribution in that year, the year of death. And it does make a lot of sense to think about how you take your RMD distribution from a planning standpoint early in the year, so that is dealt with in case it is a year of death, and then it takes away that distribution for the beneficiary in that first year. So just a little tidbit of thought there. Obviously a lot to think about when it comes to your planning needs on that, but certainly a topic to think about on the timing of those distributions in the year.
Yeah, and there are strategies even leading into retirement that can, that can sometimes mitigate them. But
let me ask one question, since you guys can you donate your entire RIA to a charity and therefore avoid the RMD tax?
The entire thing.
Just give it away.
I don't think there's anything.
I'm sure most people wouldn't, but I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, I don't know of any reason why you couldn't do that. There are steps that would need to be handled. Now what we're talking about is beyond just a tax question. There are, this is an estate plan.
I'm sorry to ask the question.
No, that's okay. No, it's a good question. But I would say that for those kinds of things, this is where we would be looking at it in with an estate planner as well, because there are other implications with things like that where the desires are a little bit larger. So no, it's a good question. And but yeah, distributions, pre-tax accounts are going to be taxed at some point and in some way, if they are used by yourself or someone else in your family or someone else that you've chosen to give it to, other than certain kinds of charitable entities. There are very few ways around that, but there are ways that perhaps that a strategy can be put in place that either minimizes it or perhaps makes it a little more palatable. Okay, or strategic, maybe a better word.
I thought you had 10 years when you inherited it.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's that's one of the rules that changed at the end of 2019. This does not apply to spouses, okay, or let me say it better, it doesn't have to apply to spouses. Spouses are able to pass assets between each other differently than any other people or any other entities, okay. But yes, one of the rules that was changed in the beginning of 2020 was when someone else, typically a child of an account holder, inherits an account, the money has to come out of that by the end of the 10th year. Okay. Now that rule was passed at the end of 2019, and I see Rob smiling just a little bit because we've talked about this a million times.
Yeah.
The rules that govern those 10 years, some of them really even at almost 4 years in have still not been completely finalized. There were interpretations of that at the beginning of how it was assumed to work. that the IRS came back and said, "Oh, no, that's not what we meant." And we said, "Okay, well then what did you mean?" Well, we don't know yet. That's I'm paraphrasing just a tad, but that's pretty much how it's gone down. Some of those things in 2023 are still being clarified about that 10-year rule and whether or not you have to take certain chunks out each year, which appears to be the case now. That was definitely not the way it was interpreted in 2020 and 2021, and even at the beginning of 2022. But the IRS has come out and said, don't worry, we're not going to penalize you for not following these rules. To which we said, well, that's very, very generous of you. You're not going to penalize us for not following a rule that didn't exist. Thank you very much. That was nice. Mm-hmm. So anyway, but yes, Bruce, to answer your question, when a non-spouse inherits an account, it typically needs to be fully withdrawn by the end of the 10th year at the after someone has passed.
Mike, just to add one point of clarity to that, and this is a great topic. It might be it could be a call all on its own, but to Mike's point, it is 10 years. But if that deceased individual had not taken their RMD during that year, that RMD still has to happen in that year of death. So
calculated based on the deceased person's age.
Right. And then for the beneficiary, they're required to take their first distribution the following year of death. So just my point, I'm only saying that because I made the point that that first year distribution and year of death still has to happen. And then that kicks in for a beneficiary.
Right. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to it. I know we kind of ended up, I said at the beginning, we were going to go through it in depth. We kind of ended up going through it in a little bit more depth, which is fine. And happy to do it. But again, there are still some individual components that can be tweaked a bit for each person. So if you need any further details on that one, just give us a call and we can talk you through it. Okay. So, all right, with that, we will end it there. And thank you all again. Thank you for sticking with us, and even through a little bit longer question session, which is fantastic. And please, no one take that as a negative. We love the questions. So thank you for everything, and you'll be hearing from us quite a bit over the next few weeks and months. We got a lot of fun stuff coming. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.